So, if you've watched Alex Garland's newest film, Men, there's a chance you probably walked out of the theater confused at what you'd just seen, and you weren't the only one. After the first viewing, I was intrigued but still not totally sure what the point was. But after listening to some interviews, reflecting on it, and watching the movie a second time, I think I've come to a little bit of a better understanding of some of the themes in Men. It should also be said that this analysis will be filled with in-depth spoilers. The film opens with our protagonist, Harper, driving out to the English countryside in order to take a 2-week vacation and heal from a past traumatic event. Arriving, she takes an apple from a tree in the garden, something that gets a disapproving nod from the owner, Jeffrey. The imagery of Harper taking an apple immediately references the Bible story of Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve can itself be criticized for the themes of victim blaming. After all, how could a newborn without a sense of morality begin to intelligently make a decision about morality? In that same sense, since the story is tackling themes of toxicity with men, you could interpret the taking of the apple as the action that started the entire events of the film, and by extent be blaming the victim, Harper. Entering her rental, we're introduced to the first man played by Rory Kinnear, Joffrey. Throughout the story, the different men will exhibit different toxic personality traits inhabited by men, and while Joffrey is the mildest and least threatening of the bunch, it's clear that he has some preconceived notions that he needs to act chivalrous and overgenerous in the presence of women. This is shown by his insistence to carry all of Harper's bags, even though he drops them, and by paying for her bill, even though she insists that she's okay. After Joffrey finishes the tour, we're briefly introduced to Harper's friend, Riley, a character who Harper will turn to for help at various parts of the film. While getting ready for a walk, we briefly flash back to the traumatic event. Harper and her husband, James, sit across from each other in a London apartment building. She has just informed him of her decision to divorce him, and after his cries and pleas of change and past promises don't persuade her, he tells her that he will kill himself. Starting off timidly but slowly getting more aggressive, James tells her that if she leaves him, his death will be on her, and she will have to live with that for the rest of her life. Cutting back to the walk, Harper encounters an abandoned tunnel, in which she promptly starts yelling out rhythmic echoes. After a couple moments, a man suddenly sits up at the end of the tunnel and begins to run after her. Harper runs home, and it isn't until the next morning that she notices the man, completely naked, standing in the garden. After he charges for the door and puts his hand through the mail slot, she calls the police, who promptly show up and arrest the man. She's shaken, but after a brief conversation with Riley, she continues on with her vacation. Arriving at a church, we flash back to the end of the argument. James, now becoming more physical, takes Harper's phone and begins telling her she doesn't get to feel scared or like a victim, because he's the victim. After refusing to unlock her cell, he punches her in the nose. She gets up, enraged now, and kicks James out of the apartment. Outside of the church, a young boy approaches her and asks her to play a game with him. She refuses, and he responds by calling her a stupid bitch. The boy is wearing a mask of a woman, and is shown later placing the mask on a dead bird, forming a puppet of sorts. To me, this seems like men thinking of and treating women as personal playthings. In this scenario, it's the child literally playing with a mask of a woman, but in a more realistic scenario, it could be that of a husband expecting his wife to take care of the home, as they both liken the woman in the scenario to a function that they need to complete. Harper is then confronted by the vicar, who appears docile and friendly at first, a trait many religious or government officials exploit in order to lure in victims. In their conversation, Harper reveals what finally happened to her husband. In a fit of rage, James broke into the apartment upstairs, where he attempted to climb down to their balcony below. As he was climbing, he either slipped or let himself go. It's never explicitly stated. On the way down, James gets one final look into Harper's eyes before he lands. Going to find his body, Harper finds him, foot twisted at an unnatural angle and arms split down the middle by a fence post. The vicar listens to the story and seems to empathize with her at first, until he finally accuses her of being responsible for his death. He explains himself by saying that men shouldn't hit women, but it's a fact of life that they do, and had she given James a chance to apologize, he could still be alive. The vicar represents two main traits. Firstly, he completely excuses other men for things that shouldn't be excused by saying it's just a man thing. Secondly, the vicar is clearly a very sexually repressed man. From the way he inappropriately touches her legs on the bench to the way he sensually rubs the wood after she gets up, the vicar is clearly hiding something, and in the end, when the thing takes his form, it even goes so far as to use its own physical injury in a sexual manner. Arriving at the pub looking for a drink, she runs into Joffrey and a slew of other men played by Rory Kinnear. After some patronizing behavior, a police officer comes in and informs Harper that they've had to let the man go. Confused, she tells him the man was stalking him, to which he responds, "Right, well, if you see him, just let us know," completely undermining her claims. Once arriving home, she notices the policeman staring at her from outside. At this point, I'm gonna say it's kind of up to interpretation how much of this movie is real, but the way I see it is that everything up until this point was Harper's real experiences with men in the town. And from this point on, with the exception of when Joffrey shows up, is the homeless man from the tunnel who shapeshifts into these other men. After the thing in the shape of the policeman and some other patrons of the bar force her back into the house, the real Joffrey shows up, where he insists on going out into the dark to check out the surroundings, even though Harper pleads for him not to. Joffrey turns around and mentions that at the age of 7, his father told him he had the qualities of a failed military man, and that now he's going to show him. It feels weirdly personal for the moment, but it's one of the more straightforward ways the movie acknowledges the way men pass on the same damage to other men. Expectedly, once stepping outside, the lights go out and he's presumably killed, where the shapeshifting man, now covered in leaves and other mossy material, slowly follows her to the house. Again, he sticks his hand through the mail slot, but this time Harper brings a knife into his arm. In one of the most uncomfortable moments in the film, the thing slowly pulls his arm back through the slot, cutting his arm and hand down the middle. At this point, the thing begins to teleport and shapeshift around the house, appearing as different men. We have the kid from the church playing with a dead bird wearing the mask of a woman, a couple bar patrons who chase her violently, and the vicar who gives her one of the most disturbing monologues I've ever heard, and ultimately tries to sexually assault her. She runs outside after stabbing him and drives away until she hits the creature now appearing as Joffrey. Throwing her out of the car and then attempting to run her over with it, they both make their way back to the house, where the man appears in its natural form. At this point, the man begins to swell up and ends up giving birth to the young boy. The boy cries and begins to approach Harper, but swells up and gives birth to the vicar. The cycle continues until the creature spits out its final stage, James, who sits next to Harper on the couch. To me, this disturbing imagery of a continual rebirth is a symbolic representation of men passing on their own damage or toxic behaviors, symbolized by the same injuries that they all carry. The wounds that James sustained in his fall and the wounds that the creature received throughout the night are identical. The creature has, just like James did, blamed Harper for the wounds it has received as a result of its own behavior. Harper sits with him and asks him what he wants. James looks at her and responds plainly, "Your love." The way I read this ending is Harper accepting she has no blame in his death. She turns and says simply, "Yeah," but there's something in her behavior and the way that she's not even afraid, she's just tired at that point, makes me feel like she's over it. Asking him what he wanted was his opportunity to apologize, something that the vicar put in the back of her mind. But the way he still made himself out to be the victim, even when given another shot, made Harper realize that he would never change. At the same time, it's also interesting to look at it from the perspective of James. Now, I'm not going to argue in favor of his behavior, it's completely inexcusable, but if you look at him asking for her love as his genuine pleading instead of a refusal to apologize, you could look at this as a criticism of men for the lack of being able to express love healthily. Now, I can only speak to my personal experiences as a man, but a close friendship like the one Harper and Riley have is not something I can relate to. And if you look at men in a general manner, I think it can be said that there are clear problems with healthy expressions of love. It could be that, as fucked up as it may be, James threatening to kill himself was something he genuinely thought was an example of affection, which is why he reacted aggressively when he didn't get the response he wanted. This video has been a lot longer than I already wanted it to be, so I'm just gonna end it here. If you haven't seen Men yet, please try to do so ASAP, and if you're still confused, maybe go watch it again, and leave a comment about what you thought. I really enjoyed this one, and I'm looking forward to Alex Garland's newest project. Until next time, peace.